Hi, I'm Jessica Irving Marshall, President and CEO of the Green Mission and GM-ESG. And this is a short presentation on some research that we have done over the past 7.5 years with the Green Mission and with GM-ESG, our new company, regarding the architectural salvage of barn lumber and what goes into that valuation, as well as what we see as valuators and what other market participants upon whom we rely for these economic indicators can take into account within their own businesses within the lumber market. Okay, so like I said, this will be about the architectural salvage of antique barn lumber. We see a lot of these pop up around the country, and there's a very detailed article on our website that goes into many more of the particulars in the data. But we get this question a lot, as well as from our deconstruction colleagues who are actually deconstructing the barns, to the secondary market retailers who are selling the barn material, as well as owners. And what we see in this market is really a lot of a hidden treasure that needs other market participants on the supply chain to jump in and really close some of the gaps in valuation that we see here. So, as we all know, lumber is a scarce, finite resource, and it's priced with what we study. There's very little transparency, and the market right now favors buyers just because of how it's not organized. There's not an Amazon or a Lowe's to go and order antique barn lumber. So the real value declined from 2016 to 2026. Nominal prices were flat against the 39.1 cumulative inflation. I'll get into those numbers later. That's what we look at as evaluators, and I'll try to explain what that means in real world terms. There's the 50 to 70% premium for authentic hand-hewn timbers over sawn equivalents, and the value has migrated instead of from the surface and the linear feet or the board feet or the square feet that are salvaged to the structure. What kind of original species is this wood? Down 28% is the decline in working farms, reporting an old barn from 2027 to 2017. So now there are fewer than 1/4 of farms that have a pre-1960 barn. So from a valuation standpoint, this is kind of exciting because there is a scarce resource right now that is not being very well captured on the supply and demand curve, just because of the distribution channels and the point at which that lumber is continued along the processing, which we'll get to, along that continuum. There's also the OBBB, which is the new tax law. Last year of July 4th, 2025, there was a new AGI floor on charitable deductions and heightened appraisal scrutiny. So where we see most of these valuations are people who want to donate to a nonprofit for the IRS defined fair market value of the lumber. So we have to study this in order to be IRS qualified appraisers. We need to know what the market is for this lumber and why it can vary so widely between species and age. So white oak, American chestnut, longleaf heart pine, always at the top. Chestnut, irreplaceable in practice because of the blight. You can go into the history of what happened there in our article and footnotes, but there's often $18 to $20 per board foot. Common softwood pine could be 1 to 3. So timber has how it was worked. The hand-hewn timbers with the broad axe marks, those are the largest premium, 50 to 70% over the sawn equivalents. Circle sawn material, which is post 1860, is worth less, not worthless, worth less. One Ohio dismantler will not buy it below 10 by 10 dimensional lumber. So the dimensions, the value rises steeply with the cross section because large old growth timbers cannot be replaced. So a reclaimed 2x4 can run $1.50 to $4.20 linear feet. Hand hewn, all of a sudden you're 22 to 27 per linear foot. Antique oak, then you're looking at the 25 to 30 per linear foot. But you need to know to whom you can sell it. And a lot of times you're looking at quick sales because the people who are extracting the lumber are not plugged into the entire reclaimed secondary market. So that's a problem that other people need to solve in the secondary market, which I write a lot about in our research on our website. So standing barn to saleable inventory. This is where deconstruction comes into play. I am a CPA. I do not know how to deconstruct, but I know how to value the materials that are extracted as part of the deconstruction. We have a great list of deconstruction contractors around the country that do some of the work for our clients that is then extracted and donated to charity. So we have a good list of some of the superstars of deconstruction that we're happy to share. So hand deconstruction costs about 2 times what a mechanical demolition does. It's more expensive. So the reason we come in as CPAs and qualified appraisers are the materials are extracted and donated to charity for that non-cash charitable contribution, which is a tax deduction. Schedule A for individual and pass-throughs. It's on the 1120 for C Corps. Again, if you want to read more than you ever thought you could about this deduction, look at the Green Mission Inc. Website, especially our tax articles. So this is the same material where you see a tenfold spread. This is as is, all the way to pine that is processed with reclaimed, kiln dried. So you can see along that range of production and modification, there's significant profit margins in there. The key is, how do you get the extracted material into the right hands along the supply chain who have the value add? And then how do you get it to the final sale, who is then selling it for the high marginal cost, everyone getting paid on the wholesale as you go? It needs to be an entire secondary market ecosystem, which, as long as we've been doing this, right now does not exist. It is very piecemeal, which we get into with barn lumber. That's one example, but with the entire deconstructed building materials reuse, there is yet to be an overall solution that can allow somebody who wants to renovate their 2,000 square foot condo and use all reclaimed materials. That could take 4 different websites finding who has this. Can we get this shipped from Philly? Oh, look, here's something we need from Ohio. They don't ship. It's off of Facebook Marketplace. Oh, here's something else, but we'd have to send a truck all the way out to Oregon to retrieve and bring it back. So it's not feasible. What I'm hoping and waiting and consulting with are people a heck of a lot smarter than me in e-commerce who can put this entire ecosystem together, because it's multi-billion-dollar industry once this is figured out. But in the meantime, I'll just keep droning on about the valuations that we observe. So current market value by material type. This is just some of the cost points and the price points that we see on the open market. And you can see again in their hand-hewn timber, that's where a lot of that will be, in the antique premium species. So where can you purchase these? There's fragmented channels. These are the 6 big ones that we identified. There's no central exchange, no index, and no guides. So specialty dealers and remillers, they set the top of the retail market, and they're the most reliable source of published comparables. That's where we have some of those linear feet of milled flooring. There's also volume tier wholesalers, so kiln dried, denailed stock, quantity discounts. Brown Hardwood is a good one. They actually will post a lot of their information so we can read and study it. Salvage yards and nonprofit reuse warehouses can be this treasure trove of things that are found. And we spend a lot of time as I'm traveling for business with this company or with my tax practice, visiting reuse retailers, capturing their inventory. We extract all of those price points and include them into our proprietary database that we use internally for our own valuation. But we really need people in the market to care enough about this profit-making opportunity. It's enough to care about why we do this, which is because this is hugely sustainable. This can solve a lot of the issues that we look at today: job creation, growth, economic development, domestic economic development. That is all in there, but until we get the basics of how person A in Washington, D.C. can get enough lumber to build an entire structure within the few clicks of a button and in the same time frame that they can get from build.com, then we can start talking about a functional market, but we're not there. Bulk and lot dealers, so that is as is truckload lots. They're often naily and ungraded. That's where the bargains can be found, especially for people along the supply chain who have the means and the production to improve the raw materials, upsell. Profit margin is there. The gross margin on that is incredible if we're looking at plotting these out and the jumps along the cost continuum. When we model that, those who can get these quick large loads that are unsorted and unnailed and can process them and pick through what needs to be recycled, what could be used, what could be sold at a restore or a resale secondary retailer. There's a lot of economic activity to be had there. Specialty hardwood dealers. So this is small quantities of rare species. Wormy American chestnut, yellow heart pine. Usually when I see this with either tax clients, procurement, or construction projects, these are very high and limited scope procurement of a very, very expensive material that is meant to be showcased. These are not what my dream vision of the functional secondary market would be, what you'd click on the equivalent of Lowe's or Build.com or Home Depot. Online marketplace, Barn Traders is fantastic. They are probably the closest thing to a national marketplace. There is a restored 1840s hand-hewn 40 by 54 foot frame listed at 85 grand. Craigslist, Facebook, eBay, Etsy. You're going to find small things there. And again, reach out to us offline. I have some names of incredible individuals throughout the United States who are doing this reuse retail, and they are designing for disassembly, adaptive reuse, really, really exciting things that they're doing, that they are making work economically. And I'd be happy to make those introductions. These can be sold standing barn to a dismantler. This is the cleanest outcome. Dismantler absorbs the cost removal and pays. So this is where the bargain basement element can come in, where you could potentially pick the right barn, tear it down, and extract lumber that you can then flip for $150K, whereas you're paying about $8 grand. So, but you have to have the processes and the labor and the ability and the expertise and connoisseurship to be able to choose the right barn. Wholesale already salvaged material, that captures more of the value chain, but it requires absorbing the deconstruction cost first. So scale matters. One national remiller sets a 4,000 board foot minimum. Direct retail sale, so theoretically highest price per unit, but it's the slowest. Like I said, if there's a great reused retailer in Cleveland, another one in Cincinnati, and then you found the missing board feet that you need in San Diego, that's going to take you a long time and a lot of cost to get all of those to the new project. Charitable donation to nonprofit reuse organization, that's why the Green Mission continues to plug along so successfully, is because this is a route that a lot of people take, because they're able to deduct the IRS defined fair market value, and you take a tax deduction. And again, the tax deduction, we go into in tedious detail, but it's essentially a part of the tax return, the same area where you would donate fine art or appreciated stock to charity, you donate deconstructed building materials to charity. It's incredible to see what can be done with this tax deduction, but I'm ready for all of you market participants to make my job, give me more time to go back to my tax practice, because if we can get the supply chains functional and have a supply and demand market, the person deconstructing or the builder, decon contractor from site should be able to get those materials into the secondary market, where they will by definition sell at fair market value, FMV, if not higher. And that is my hypothesis, that our values, where we are valuing these materials, unfortunately for the donor, but fortunately for them as well, because we're protecting them to ensure that these are IRS qualified appraisals, these values, in my opinion, are quite low compared to what they could be on a functional market. If there is a marble fireplace that is from the late 1800s, and let's say that it's in the curvilinear Louis XV style, which guess what? People don't want that right now. Those are sold anywhere from $1,000, sometimes $6,000. To get a brand new piece of Carrara white marble and get an artisan to carve it would cost you a heck of a lot more than that. There's where supply and demand comes into play. We often see the floating, rough-hewn lumber floating mantles sell for more than the period Louis full marble surrounds. So that's where supply and demand, what's in current fashion and design, comes into play. So market demand, who buys and why? Commercial interiors have 63% of the market share. Restaurants, breweries, hotel, retail. That's where you can see one of our charts that comes up where there was this huge push for farmhouse-chic, which gave us a big spike in the market because all of the restaurants were buying this reclaimed lumber to be displayed on walls and floors. Residential renovation is the volume segment. It drove the 2015 to 2018 boom. And again, this is fashion sensitive, responding immediately to rates and consumer confidence. Flooring is 38% of revenue. By far, flooring is going to be what we see the most of this lumber being extracted and reused as flooring, especially with hardwood, when you can have reclaimed semi-antique, vintage, antique hardware, when you can outfit an entire house with this. It's gorgeous. It adds value. You see the real estate value consequently increase as well when you implement the reclaimed materials. Heritage restoration is plus or minus 4.7 annually. It's the fastest growing segment overall and a genuine substitution market. So an architect matching 1830s framing sometimes has no alternative. The house we live in was built originally in 1848. So there are some aspects of the house where if, and this happens, one of our doors break, there is no substitute for that. We just kind of have to do our best to try to fix a knob or get things to work a little differently because these were custom-made solid core doors back from the mid to late 1800s. So there are three durable forces behind demand. Construction material prices rose 6.2% in 2025, largest annual increase since 2021, which, you know what 2021 was capturing? That was the pandemic and the supply chain crisis. So this has narrowed the gap with the new lumber. Life cycle carbon disclosure requirements and LEED credits reward reused material directly. And I know this may be a shock to a lot of people, but we do quite a bit of work with GM-ESG as well as my tax practice. Board of directors still care about ESG, sustainability, and it's not because they are, bleeding heart environmentalists who want to see ESG and want to see sustainability. They know it makes money. When you have those policies in place, looking at the long-term circular economy, alternate sources of energy, those are the norm. And so board of directors and CFOs especially recognize this, and we're doing a lot of work building the sustainability valuation metrics into their financial budgets and projections. So that's the good news. Sustainability is not dead. We just need to remind people that it makes money, which is why it needs to be included in corporate decommissioning and new builds. So supply. So it's a resource in visible decline. Inventory is fixed and shrinking. This is pretty elementary. Those trees from the late 1700s in the longleaf, the heart pine are not. Like I said, 28% of working farms reduced, 23% mean share of working farms with a pre-1960 barn, below 10% in some states. And then the range of state level declines over the census decade are averaging 27%. You can get into the data in our footnotes in the article. But you have the eastern inventory dwindling. So this is the fun part. The fun part being sarcastic and ironic that we have in the eastern inventory where we have some of these oldest barns with some of the most precious lumber. But then we have people in the northwest part of the United States that have deconstruction ordinances and mandates and some of the sustainability infrastructure to actually move the lumber. So we have the supply on one side of the country and then the demand on the other, which again goes to nationalizing and creating a functional secondary market. Labor limits supply response, so denailing, remilling, labor intensive. This limits how quickly supply can respond to price. Even better, to get this into place now, it creates jobs, it's economically viable, and it produces an asset that we, to build out our infrastructure, are going to need. So deconstruction ecosystems, like I said, are strongest. They tend to be in the Pacific Northwest. And like I said, that is Portland, Oregon is not where most of the antique barns were built. Freight regionalizes the market. So a 7,000 quote to move 1,000 board feet from Chicago to Phoenix was dismissed as commercially unreasonable. Only premium material bears the long distance freight. So this is a set of regional markets, not one national market. Again, this needs to be solved. That can be solved if we treat this like a functional economy and force it to behave like one, with just-in-time inventory, sharing of the resources and the data, working with online sales platforms that can allow, with the ease and click of a button, to supply whole construction projects with reclaimed materials. So here's the valuation. This is the farmhouse-chic peak that you can see with the jump when everybody wanted to decorate like they were in a barn. So that was fine. Then we had the commodity shock, and that is what you see with COVID, where you jump up with the framing lumber composite. Then we've had normalization and softening, and the reclaimed values did not track the new lumber recovery. Why is that? Because we don't have a functional market. We do not have the supply yet to create the demand. So again, that's on all of these incredible market participants to figure that out. Again, we consult on that, on the numbers and the values and the tax and anything to do with making those margins so that it is profitable. So here's the reclaimed barn siding, the nominally flat and materially lower. And again, this all has to do with not having a functional market. The current market has bifurcated. Like I said before, we have that hand-hewn timber. It also tends to be in smaller quantities, so it's easier to ship. Oak, chestnut, heart pine have held. A barn's value now is what is the species of lumber that you are extracting and in what dimensions, versus how many board feet, linear feet are extracted of the dimensional lumber. It rewards processing more than ever. So if you are a commercial retailer looking at investing in the infrastructure for processing and milling and grading the lumber, we work to show that the margins are there and that it is profitable, but it takes the investment in both the infrastructure as far as the assets go, but also the human capital, investing in long-term jobs that actually very exciting for a CPA, because these are well-paid jobs that tend to be recession-proof because of our needs for infrastructure and building in our country, and they're regionally sourced by definition. We can't offshore those jobs. We need people in the United States to do these jobs. So again, on a tangent, but this is an everyone wins if or when we can finally conquer creating the secondary market. The market is stubbornly opaque, which is, as a valuator, why it's so difficult and why clients get so angry when they say, why are your values too low? I saw this where somebody sold for $10 higher per board foot than your appraisal, and then we have to describe the fair market value, willing buyer, willing seller, no compulsion, adequate exposure time, what that definition of fair market value means to the IRS, and why we have to value it where it is now. But like I said, functional market values go up, which means people who are donating will be donating at a higher value, and eventually we won't need to have a tax deduction to get people to reclaim building materials because it will be profitable. Valuation appraisal standards. I'm just going to touch on this, but look at our website. With any great tax deduction like this comes a lot of abuse. And this goes into some of the tax court cases and really why the Green Mission is so busy producing these appraisals, because they are detailed, they're hard to do, they require a lot of research and writing and compliance and working with the client and working to ensure their CPA understands this. So it's quite complicated, but we're happy to keep doing it until all of you get that market functioning for the rest of us. That is the end. Again, if you have any questions, just reach out. We can be reached through our website. You can reach out to our CRO, Jenny Lumpkin. She's a wealth of knowledge. And like I said, there's more articles than you would ever want to read on the tax, on deconstruction. And we have a great list of deconstruction contractors that we trust who would be able to look at projects, as well as market participants, trying to connect the right people together into the right conversations to make this a reality. Thank you for suffering through the presentation.